Don, it's such an honor to have you here today. And I was just wondering, what you think or feel about this kind of latent kind of relationship to appreciation of photography, since you created the possibility for us really to appreciate photography in this country.
I've always thought photography was not so much as an art form, but as a way of communicating and passing on information that I traveled the world to bring back. And I went because you couldn't go. If I was going to war, many people misunderstand me. I'm quite happy to be called a photographer. And all of a sudden the art world is caught up with photography, and they're trying to kind of hijack us. I, of course, learnt my photography from other photographers. That's the way I became a photographer by accident and by violence, really. I grew up in a very violent background in North London, and I've spent most of my life embracing violence in wars and revolutions. And even a famine is a form of violence, particularly when I photographed so many children who were dying of starvation in the wars in Africa. So, because I photograph people in peril, people in pain, people being executed in front of me, I find it very difficult to get my head around the art kind of marriage and photography. I've managed to push it back and retain my place by just accepting that what I am is a photographer. But of course, having said that, the fact is that years ago we used to send people, organizations, prints that I made in my darkroom. And there must have been some very cunning people around, even 50 years ago. They kept those prints, and suddenly they're appearing in Christie's. And I have to ring up and put a stop to it, because they were my prints, and I paid for the paper. So you can see how messy it's all become. And anyway, what I'm trying to say is that photography has been the most wonderful marriage that I married the right woman when I married photography. It was the very best possible thing that could have happened to me.
Well, I think there's a way in which sort of that we connect to the world, and I think when I started art school, I started painting, etc., and then I started to concentrate on film and photography because I felt this immediacy with the world, and I think there's a way in which, through your work, we've been able to appreciate and witness what's going on in the world, and I think it's this immediacy that we have in this kind of form of communication, which is very important to us. And I believe that you recently went to work in Iraq, and I wondered if you wanted to share that with us.
Well, about 4 weeks ago, a friend of mine, he and I had planned to go back to the war in Iraq, and not being the best runner in the world at my age, I kept myself awake at night thinking, shall I go? And, will I go one last time? I keep saying I'm never going to go again, but I can't resist it somehow. I like to get my information firsthand. I don't like watching manipulated news bulletins that we see on various television channels. So I said, okay, we'll go. And I was there 10 days, and then I finally got to the front, and I have some digital cameras now, and I have to keep looking at them because I'm not very clever with technical things. I love film, but we're all being pushed into the digital world. And I remember one day they said, we're going to show you a dead man, and I thought, well, what's so important about that? But it happened to be an ISIS fighter lying in the road. Half of his face was missing, half of his shoulder was missing, and he had his trousers hanging off of him because he'd been blown up. And I thought, I felt rather sorry for him, really, despite the fact that they've done the most appalling things. It's more than photography, being a photographer. It's about being a human being, and it's about having a decency and having, looking at humanity, not in a kind of, a newsman photographer. And then I saw another man come up and kick this dead man lying in the road. It was an Iraqi who did it, and I thought, why did you do that? And photography, in a way, is, for all of its glory and for all of the celebration that we're planning here today, it has really depth to it that has other meanings and has. I mean, here we are. We're gonna have photographs here. They're going to be sold for a lot of money. And I'm not being a hypocrite. I do sell my pictures, not war pictures, for money. So, but you know, you're overtaken by guilt and all kinds of emotional things, and they all flood back to you the night you try to put your head on the pillow. So you can see my struggle with the art world. The art of photography. The Americans actually are the ones who started this artistic kind of thing about why couldn't they just leave it alone and become, be a photographer?
And one of my sort of early meetings with your work, Don, was your series on London. But I was just wondering, for you, in relationship to your early work and the sort of interest in your work, because it's recording a particular moment in London's history, which I feel is very important. I wondered if you'd like to speak about that.
I think the biggest pleasure I've ever had in photography, apart from recently doing landscapes when I have the time, was to prowl the streets in Brick Lane and around east of Aldgate. But I was doing it because I came over a railway bridge one day. I used to live in Hertfordshire, and I was coming into Liverpool Street Station, and I looked down from the viaduct, and I saw some vagrant people. And I went into the office at the Sunday Times, where I worked for many years, and I said to the art editor, why don't we do something on the homeless people? And he said, get out of here and do it, get lost, go and do it, So I spent 6 weeks just hanging out in a Spitalfield market right next to the great Hawksmoor Church. And one of the other homeless guys who was trying to milk me for some money, he said, can I give you some advice? And he said, they're going to give you the dead eye. And he said, but whatever you must do, you must never flinch away from them. By that I mean they would stare at me and try and make me afraid that I would look somewhere else. And they never succeeded. But by looking into the eyes of people when you're photographing them, you get the truth. You get this depth of them, and if they share that moment with you, it's going to happen in your negative. And I love looking directly at people, not as many people as there are here today, but I love the one-to-one. And walking the streets, I felt like a predator. I felt like somebody who was hunting with a hunting rifle, but I just had a Nikon camera. I'm constantly bashing myself up and about guilt and should you do this. None of us has the right to photograph individuals on the streets unless they invite you to do it. So one of my greatest heroes was a man called Roger Main, who photographed children in West London, in Notting Hill, which you can't afford to live in these days. But you mustn't do that now, you see. There are various... the wars are closing in on what you can do, and you can't do it in this country. Having said that, of course, we've got more surveillance cameras than any country in Europe, so we're forever being watched. If it's not by somebody like me, it's those cameras up there. So what I'm saying is that I miss walking the streets, because I would walk the streets for 8 hours in Aldgate, zigzagging, crisscrossing, in the winter, very cold, but I could never have been more happy, because on some days you turn a corner and there would be the picture. And the biggest fear, of course, is that you may be attacked. A man did grab me one day and says, give me that camera, but he didn't get it from me. I'm very nice to people until they try to comment, and then I'm going to stand up for myself. But I don't have the right to steal their images. I know that. So there's conflict, really, in photography.
Yes. I mean, I think there's a way, you're thinking and talking about this very important sort of moment. And I think now we've entered into this kind of digital moment in photography. There's something very important, I think, about the experience of analog and the surface of celluloid and the relationship to pixels and this relationship to grain that I think people are hankering after. And I think that's been very important in a kind of revaluation of photography, in fact. There's something about early photography, black and white photography, that we can see as, in essence, carrying this sort of moment that crystallizes this form of communication, which digitalization has kind of, in a way, lost.
You're absolutely right. In fact, they're trying to hijack photography because the digital cameras are extraordinary. I mean, I have a darkroom and I still process film and I go in that darkroom. But, digital photography could be a totally lying kind of experience. You can move anything you want in it, lampposts and cars and things. The whole thing can't be trusted, really. And when I see these extraordinary pictures in color, it looks as if someone's trying to redesign the chocolate box. For me, it doesn't work. It's hideous. I stand in fields in Somerset where I live. And in fact, the best experience I had this year was standing on Hadrian's Wall in a blizzard. Now, if I'd have used a digital camera, I would have made that look attractive. But I did it in black and white, and I was going for my Wagnerian skies, and I wanted you to get the feeling you were cold. It was lonely standing on the wall. And then a man came into my picture, and I screamed, and I said, "Can you get out the way?" And I took the picture, and then I got down and went over to apologize. And when he turned around, I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm from Kazakhstan." And I thought, how extraordinary to be on Hadrian's Wall, just he and I, but he from Kazakhstan. And photography gives you those amazing gems of moments. And, I'm so privileged to have had such a life like this. Have I not have had this, fortunate life? And by the way, I was in the Air Force for 2 years in a photographic section, and I failed the trade test to become a photographer because I couldn't read and I couldn't remember the theory papers. So, I've been blessed by this opportunity, which I've grabbed with both hands. But I've also worked incredibly hard, and I've never shortcut anything. I've always put the full day in.
I mean, in a way, I think with digitalization, there's a way in which kind of photography has become democratized. I mean, everyone takes photographs on their iPhone, and in a way, it's become this sort of natural kind of thing to do. I just wondered, what you think the role of photography is today in your work in relationship to that sort of experience.
Well, first of all, years ago when I was very young and I just discovered photography, I found an old antique shop down in Tintagel, and there was nothing in it, but the man said, "Are you interested in books?" And I said, "Well, it all depends what kind of books." And he said, "I've got this pile of photographic books," and I nearly levitated off the ground, and I thought, hang on, don't show too much enthusiasm, you'll bang up the price. So anyway, and then I saw the books, they were that high, and I thought, how the hell am I going to get those back? I didn't have a car, and I knew there'd be string around it, which would cut my fingers to death. So he said, "I want £10 for these books." And that was almost my living weekly wage in those days. So I bought the books, and then I started delving into them. They started in 1880 something. They were called photograms. And I told Mark Hayworth Booth, who was the collector of prints at the V&A, and he said, "We've got the whole set of those. They're most valuable." So I discovered in those books people like Peter Emerson, Frederick Evans, and my hero, Alfred Stieglitz. And I think Alfred Stieglitz was quite a cantankerous old thing, but he brought more than photography to photography. He was interested in art as well. But I was weaned on these kind of purists, really, people who loved the sky and loved the simple. And then I turned out to be doing street work and finally, 50 years of covering wars. But now you have, of course, I think that the home of photography is America. So therefore, America has led the way, and it's changed photography. It's sanitized it in some respects. And then you had color, the man William Eccleston, who does these very strange color things, the same as Martin Parr, but he does them in a different, more intellectual way, and they sell for, tens of thousands of dollars. So, photography has been slightly, taken away from the world I first entered. But it's been a wonderful experience for me, and I still can't read properly, but visually I can see better than anybody else. I can see, as soon as I go into a room, I can scan that room. I'm trained to do that, and I spend many hours in my dark room, and it's lonely. You're in the dark room, you're sucking in this terrible, dangerous chemistry, which I've been doing for 60 years. And, I've paid a high price for it, but I've shown total dedication. And I think I can honestly say what I've done is honest. Standing in the fields in Somerset doing landscape, sometimes I stand there 2 or 3 hours, I don't move, I'm like a heron who's waiting to plunge, and I don't get a picture. And I go away, and you know something? I'm not unhappy. I think you're lucky to be standing in that field. You know, you don't own photography, it owns you more. And you know, you're so fortunate to be able to just play with that, you know, that creative mind. I want the clouds to do this, they do something else. The day I get the picture, it's so exciting to rush home and process the film. So photography has been incredibly generous to me.
Don, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. Thank you.